KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Blessed to be with you, Kevin Miller, waking up on the right side. And joining us now, our great friend, Philip Hardy, a lobbyist, a patriot, a Republican, a conservative from Collective Communications, LLC. Phil, good morning.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Not bad. We just had the 4th of July celebration in the nation's capital. One of your neighborhoods, your thoughts on, well, I guess you call it the extended 4th of July weekend.
Well, I mean, it was absolutely fabulous. The real treat, the Blue Angels making a flyover, just fantastic for those people who could get to watch it or go up on their rooftops, such as myself. Just a real treat to get that sort of presentation. I have to say that in years past here, it has not been anything like that. Sure, the fireworks are pretty cool, but this was a much more substantial and just a fun thing to be able to watch for sure. So really enjoyed it, and I think it would be great for this to continue into the future, regardless of who is president.
Of course, you do miss your home in Idaho, don't you?
Of course. I miss the weather about this time of year, especially. It's pretty unbearable out here for those folks who don't go out to D.C. very often. The heat is similar in temperature, but the humidity it's just muggy and stifling. It's not the most pleasant place. I'd rather be in Stanley or in McCall or something like that for sure, Sandpoint, anywhere.
All right, our great friend Phil Hardy joining us, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. A little choked up here, getting sentimental with you. So we love talking politics. Let's go back to what happened a week ago. The return of a gentleman that you worked with for quite some time, among many people in the state and throughout the country. Congressman Raul Labrador is now the chairman of the state Republican Party. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's really something else, and a real nail-biter for a victory for him, 2 votes. I think this certainly proves that Raul Labrador feels he's not done with politics. If there's any more of a confirmation that you need that he wants to run for elective office again, you've got it right here in front of you. We have not seen the last of Raul Labrador. Now, having said that, the position of chairman in the Republican Party in Idaho is, completely voluntary. You're elected, but there's no pay. You don't get paid for that position, and you don't even get your expenses reimbursed. So I think I saw somewhere that Congressman Fulcher said all it does is cost you, a set of tires, and you're out a lot of gas money. So it's a very difficult position, and in that position, your responsibility is to engage in a massive amount of fundraising on behalf of the party. And that's not easy. It has traditionally not been easy, since about 2006 or in the early 2000s when Kirk Sullivan was chairman and the corporations were very generous. And after that, they stopped making the donations that they used to do. So Raul Labrador has got his work cut out for him. He really, really does. It's not going to be an easy job for him.
Our great friend Phil Hardy joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Then why did he make the run at this as you said, a part of a comeback strategy?
Well, the chairman of the party does have visibility at the grassroots level, for sure. There's no doubt about that. And he also can have visibility on a broader level if that chairman seeks that limelight. There's no doubt that he'll be able to issue press releases and do whatever he wants and insert himself into conversations. He is the chairman of the Republican Party. I certainly expect that to be his strategy, to keep his name recognition out there and to build a stronger base across the state for whatever run he has in mind coming up. And quite frankly, I think that there are many of those positions that he could be interested in if one comes available, and that is the real issue that we need to get to here is when one comes available. I don't necessarily see him challenging someone successfully, and these positions don't always come around at with any great frequency. So he could be in for a bit of a wait.
You don't see him possibly taking a run at his old seat?
Anything is possible, but I think that would not be successful. So I don't think that Representative Fulcher has done anything that would warrant folks wanting to jump ship, so to speak. So at this point, I don't see that as being likely. But then again, with Raul Labrador, you never really know what he's going to be doing. So traditionally, if you look at statistics, a freshman congressman is technically at his most vulnerable in his first term. That has been received wisdom, or actually statistical proof, for many years. But I think that in some place like Idaho, it would really take Russ Fulcher doing something egregiously wrong for him to be vulnerable enough to a primary challenge from anybody.
Our great friend Phil Hardy joining us, talking Idaho politics, Washington politics live from Washington, D.C. Tell us about your new company.
Yeah, so I am looking forward to announcing this. I mean, I've worked for myself in the past, and I've decided to do it again. And it's starting off with a very good, a very great way. I'm excited to be continuing my work here in D.C. and working on my clients that I specialize in, which is a lot of, Western affairs. Wildfire is something that I'm particularly interested in, and I'm working with for those people who live in the West, like us in Idaho. I represent companies that drop it from the air and also who manufacture the retardant itself. So the orange stuff that comes out of planes, that I represent both of those, the planes and the people who make the retardant. So those are among other clients. Really find it exciting again to be able to work on my own and build my own business. So it's a good time. So thanks for that.
Now we'll talk a little bit more about this. So, as someone who has worked with all the decision makers in the Gem State, now you're in Washington. How does again, and this is a compliment, Congressman Labrador is his own man, but this was a brutal primary. He publicly stated that he blamed the Republican Party for allowing the negative ads to be aired against him, as if they could do anything about it. Maybe they could have, by now Governor Little, by Tommy Ahlquist. So is it about mending bridges? Is it about figuring out how to get the conservatives and perhaps the establishment together? And I know that's easier said than done, Phil.
Well, with all due respect to Raul, I think this is really just about him positioning himself for a future run. Now, he may need to employ those stratagems that you just mentioned, trying to unite, the party, try to unite whatever factions there are, and mend fences with the folks in the party. He won by 2 votes. So there are as many people practically who didn't want him as chairman as did. But all you need is, one more than the other guy. So you win. I think that he may have quite a few uncomfortable conversations going forward with the folks who didn't vote for him, and he's going to have to win their votes again. He's going to have to go out and work hard and show that he's listening and understand what is important to the grassroots of the party, as well as the regular Republicans and people who vote in the general election. I mean, he's got some work to do, and he's been in D.C. for a while, so it's good that he's going to be back in Idaho and really just focusing on that. And look, there's no denying Raul is a very intelligent guy, and he understands a lot of the issues that are important to the country. He's just got to get back into Idaho and really dig down deep and figure out what's motivating people there.
And I know this is a long shot. Could we see him possibly make another run going after Governor Little?
Again, I from my vantage point, I don't see how that is feasible or even likely. We don't take out our own in the primary process generally at that level. It's not something that happens. And it can be very damaging if you have any intentions of running again for something. Let's not forget that Raul Labrador is still a relatively young man. I think he's only 53 or something like that, or 52. So he shouldn't, of course, I'm sure he is impatient, but I think that patience would be something he needs to consider here. I think he's just putting himself in the position where if something does happen, if there's a retirement, someone simply doesn't want to run again, that he's in the position to best, be a front runner for that office.
Sure, of course, you take a look at Senator Crapo, Senator Risch. Oof, I don't see those guys giving anything up, considering seniority is paying off finally for Idaho in the post-Larry Craig world.
And that's totally true. However, you do come to a certain age where you just look around and certain people say to themselves, do I really want to still be here? And there are obviously examples of senators staying in office until they're in their 90s or 100s, and both Senator Crapo and Senator Risch have quite a long time to go before they reach their 90s, but they're already in their 70s, so some people just decide that they've had enough. And I'm not saying that that's the case for either of those gentlemen, but this does happen. There are retirements. Senator Udall in New Mexico is retiring this year. He's not under any pressure. He's just decided he's had enough, so you can't rule that out, but I don't see it happening, much like you.
Our great friend Phil Hardy joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. You can catch Phil at Collective Communications, LLC, his new endeavor. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's it like to work in Washington. But finally, in this segment, we've got about a minute left. The congressional delegation getting along, unified. How important is that to the folks at home?
Well, it's very important. I know that Congressman Fulcher is working very closely with Senator Crapo and Senator Risch, as well as Congressman Simpson. We have a very small delegation in Idaho, and we always hear talk about that. But it's important for all four members to be on the same page whenever possible. And they're not always going to agree, but at least they can talk about these things and talk about them amongst themselves and get their staff together and work in a collegial manner. And that's obviously not what was happening previously. So in the sense that we can have, half the state tied up and working well with the other half of the state, it is important. So you can't put too fine a point on that. And it's working so far. So if it's working, I think that it's probably continue to work.
More coming up with our great friend Phil Hardy. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. That's 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Continuing on with our great friend Phil Hardy, who joins us from Washington, D.C. If you want to get a hold of Phil, Collective Communications, LLC. How difficult is it to work for yourself, to launch your own company?
Well, I have to be honest with you. This is a funny story, and it's really something that is special about Idaho. So my company is actually an Idaho-based company. My LLC is registered in the state of Idaho. You could not have an easier process of registering and starting a business in Idaho. It really is a matter of filling in one form and paying a small fee. I can't remember how much it was, $20 or something like that. Well, then you want to bring this company to D.C., and you are confronted with the most ridiculous bureaucracy. It took an unbelievable amount of time and no small amount of money to simply register an existing company in the District of Columbia. It cost nearly $1,000, and it took about 2.5 full days of dealing with bureaucrats to get that going. I mean, it could not be more different. And this is one of the things that I've now experienced firsthand with what our governors and our leaders have told people in the past. Doing business in Idaho is extremely simple. We want people to come here and find it easy to operate a business. It's almost like they don't want you to start a business in D.C. So in that respect, I had to, now that it's over, I had to laugh for the difficulty rather than in Idaho. But, running a business, which I've done before in the past for many years, it's a different thing. You're working for yourself, and obviously a lot of your listeners are doing the same. My grandfather once told me, it's better to make 50 cents working for yourself than $1 working for someone else. And while I think that's possibly an extreme figure, there's some truth in that. So as long as you've got an established, list of clients who are willing to work with you, that certainly does smooth the way.
Let's talk about the governor, a person you know very well. Recently announced he got some national attention for this, cutting bureaucracy in the state by 40%. Your thoughts on Governor Little so far?
Yeah, I think he's doing a good job. I think that this is what he has done in that respect is something that should be replicated by a lot of other states. I think there have been other people who have pointed out in the past that there are so many redundant or, stupid laws and rules on the books in Idaho that may have made sense at one time or almost made sense in one time that just didn't pan out or just are, archaic. These things need to be got rid of. And I think that there's a lot more, I'm sure. They just found the easy things to get rid of. Now they're going to start looking at some of the ones that are a bit more substantive and decide, whether or not those should be repealed as well. Anything that a more attractive place for business is the thing. And that is what Governor Little has always focused on, is trying to make sure that the state has a predictable, level playing field for business to operate in and for the benefit of all the citizens. And he's never wavered in that. I mean, he's been saying that since the day he became lieutenant governor in 2009.
Well, and you take a look at where he's going to go and his platforms and such very early on into his administration, but he's got to deal with the envy of a lot of states, this unprecedented growth. You see this every time that you return home. We're building another building. We've got the ACHD season where it's the orange cones, and more orange cones and barrels.
Yeah, no, it's true that Boise in particular is going through a rather dramatic growth spurt, and people aren't all necessarily happy about that. And I suspect that a strong factor that people don't necessarily take into play was from 2008 until 2011 at least, there was really no growth in Idaho. In fact, there was reverse growth. There was a lot of hardship. People's property values tanked. A lot of people lost their homes. So there has been a pent-up demand for growth that's really now just absolutely roaring. And I think folks probably don't want to hear this, but there needs to be a bit of perspective. It's still a fabulous place to live, a fabulous place to raise a family. And the real problem, if there is, and I know it's a problem, is finding affordable housing. So when you see a building going up that's apartments, you should be happy because hopefully that will keep your own rent from going up.
Right, easier said than done. Phil Hardy joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Were you surprised that Mike Simpson said that he's going to run for re-elect? And here's something that I'd like to ask you. And again, I love talking to you, and we love hearing what you have to say, this inside politics, if you will. But could you ever see Congressman Labrador challenging Congressman Simpson based on the fact that I don't believe you have to live in the district?
Yeah, I think that would be an extreme move on his part. Raul did not perform particularly well in the 2nd Congressional District when he ran for governor. I think that he would basically literally need to move and spend all his time there, and I'm not sure that would really be enough. I think it's great that Congressman Simpson's going to run again. He's a very senior member on the House Appropriations side. He's very well respected on the other side of the aisle for the technical acumen that he's accumulated for his time in Congress. His subcommittee works on a very bipartisan basis, so his influence there is not quite what it was, of course, when he was chairman, but he's the ranking member, and he does have a lot of influence, which is very helpful for the state of Idaho. So to the extent that Mike Simpson wants to continue serving, I think that's a very good thing.
Can't see anybody really challenging him. The last challenger he had, Brian Smith, it was a brutal campaign, both on air and off air. Congressman Simpson, a nice man, but plays for keeps, and those folks at the INL, they love him.
Yes, and if you recall, the results of that primary weren't very close at all. So while vast sums were spent on both sides, one would have thought perhaps the results would have been closer, but they weren't. So it's unlikely that someone is ever going to be able to mount that sort of challenge again with that sort of backing from outside groups. So why bother? So I think that literally is a seat that's Mike Simpson's until he no longer wants it. And that's not a bad thing.
Moving on, Jim Risch seems to be enjoying himself, the senator.
Yes, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Geez, that's one of the plum positions you could ever hope to have in the United States Senate. I haven't seen as much from him as you see from people like Marco Rubio when it comes to foreign policy and things of that nature, but he's certainly going to be making his presence felt on that committee, possibly for years to come. I don't see the Republicans losing control of the Senate in the near future, so he should be in that position for quite a while if he chooses to stay there. I think that he's got a very good relationship with the president, which is, of course, important, and they should be able to work on these things together to the benefit of the country. But sure, I would absolutely be loving it if I was him.
More coming up with our great friend Phil Hardy as we get ready for the weekend, a little in between the 4th of July and, of course, the weekend. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Rolling on the right side, waking up on the right side. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. The champion of the state of Idaho, Phil Hardy, joining us. Collective Communications LLC is his company. If you want to get a hold of him, talk about some issues. Let's talk about the companies that you represent, specifically now that it's fire season, not only in Idaho, but throughout the Northwest. How can we prevent these disasters from happening?
Well, that's a really good question. And it's something, believe it or not, the state of California is doing a better job on than you would possibly imagine. There are a lot of folks on the environmental side that don't want to see trees cut down. They don't want to see harvests for timber. They don't want to reduce the fuel loads that are in the forest. Always a lawsuit about that. California is really leading the way in trying to remove those barriers to protecting homes. They are creating, safe areas around towns that are overpopulated with dead trees, and just really, folks in Boise, the city of trees. It wasn't just a couple of years ago there was a fire on the Boise front, quite near to where I lived. The trees are beautiful, but you've got to keep them away from your homes. And something called Firewise is a very important thing. There are, of course, though, vast tracts of Idaho that will burn in the summer in the wilderness where there's really no genuine attempt to put those fires out because they don't really threaten people or property or critical infrastructure. But they do, make a mess of the air, and they make it difficult for people with breathing problems. And that's something that you're going to see more of in the future, people talking about the emissions from these trees, the smoke, and the particulate it's just not good for people with breathing problems. So we really have to come to grips with the fact that the climate is changing and that our forests are completely overgrown. And one thing I learned when I worked for Congress is the forest grows back twice as fast as you can cut it down. So even if we had a robust logging program left in the Pacific Northwest, which we barely do, we would really be needing to cut down far more trees than we are now, or far more trees than we were in the past. So we're tackling the problems of the past with the added problems of the present. And truly, it's a difficult thing. Obviously, I do whatever I can with my clients that work in the field of wildfire suppression. And while it's something I do enjoy, it's something that, brings a lot of devastation to communities, and that's hard to deal with as well.
Right, and it's frustrating, Phil, as you mentioned, the air is just horrific in the summer. It really doesn't clear out till about late September, early October.
Well, yeah, and to be completely honest, the fire season in California now is much later, and it goes often into October, November, and even December. So you're having the way the winds generally move. They go up north, and they go over to Oregon, and they cut across Idaho. So we can be covered in Idaho with smoke from fires that are not even our own, and it turns the air orange. And really, it's obviously unpleasant for everyone. And we need a far more robust program. And again, going back to Representative Simpson, kudos to him for, getting more funding to deal with fighting wildfire, more funding to the Forest Service. So the Congress has acted. Starting in October, there's additional funding for this. It's the fire fix, as they called it. You know, for those folks who do have homes out in the woods, again, you know, you have to keep the trees away from your house, create a defensible perimeter, and then, you know, hope for the best.
Indeed. And, you know, we take a look at those people that fly into the fires, that jump into the fires themselves. It's crazy. Maybe, I'm sure folks from California are very familiar with it, but maybe people moving here from east of the Great River don't understand that there is this legitimate fire season. And, you know, the idea that the federal government should allow states and allow others to fight fires more effectively would be welcome here as well as anywhere in the West.
And to be completely fair, you know, the state of Idaho has been one of the leaders in the good neighbor policy. That's what it's called, where ranchers and folks can do a better job trying to put out fires on their own land before they get to be too large. As recently as 7 or 8 years ago, it was basically illegal for you to try to put out a fire on your own property if you were a rancher or something like that. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, this was the truth. And now there are materials that are being given to ad hoc, say, fire groups, fire departments. They're not departments, but groups of folks who band together, you know, to go and try to catch a fire before it gets too big. And that's the bottom line. If you catch a fire in between, you know, 10 and 100 acres, it's not going to likely spread, you know, much more than that. But if a fire gets to 1,000 acres, they generally turn into catastrophic fires where you're not going to stop that burning for quite a while.
Right, and that'll be an impact on the environment here in the city of Boise and the state of Idaho. All right, Phil Hardy joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Let's, by the way, you can catch our great friend Phil at his new company. We always want to make sure that we pump up Big Phil, Collective Communications, LLC. So how has Congress changed now that the devious little libs have taken over? Obviously, Phil, you and the conservatives and the Republicans were running wild on the first 2 years of the administration. Now, are you guys being hunted by the libs?
Actually, Kevin, they're hunting each other at this point. And one of the things that recently happened that was absolutely astonishing was that the moderate wing of the Democratic Party forced Nancy Pelosi to hold a vote on the humanitarian crisis assistance bill that the Senate had passed literally 84-4. She was planning on not holding a vote on that and instead sending an amended version back to the Senate, basically killing the whole thing. And this is the group of people who are decrying the humanitarian crisis. Well, she lost, and so did the progressive wing of the party. The moderates insisted that there be a vote on the Senate package, and it passed. And now there's going to be federal assistance for all of these folks at the border where there's a crisis. It's hard to imagine how the progressive wing of the party thought it was a good idea to kill a bill that passed the Senate 84-4, overwhelmingly bipartisan, in favor of a bill that may not have been able to get the same level of support in the Senate while people were suffering. So I think that was a wake-up call to the progressive wing, which is probably why they're down at the border now, trying to create new problems for the administration. It's really going to be interesting watching how they eat each other alive. It's not about Republicans anymore. It's about the far left that's trying to take over the Democratic Party. Had a setback there, but they're not finished yet, that's for sure.
Right, and then you see, you know, the whole obsession with going after a gentleman that you've worked for. You've know his sons, and that would be the president. What do you make of, well, Russian collusion, delusion didn't happen, but Phil Hardy, we're going to go after impeachment. Mueller, get up here and start singing, Mueller.
Yeah, I think you're actually seeing, you know, a tone change here in the media. You know, for my sins, I do get the Washington Post delivered, and I have noticed a shift in the coverage on the president. They're trying to deal with the issues at hand rather than completely just demonize the president wall to wall. because they know it's not working, and they're going to have to start criticizing him on policy rather than on his idiosyncrasies, of which there are obviously many. They know that if the economy doesn't change, that he's an overwhelming favorite to be reelected. And if they're going to beat him, they're going to have to come up with something that really resonates with the American people, other than forcing everyone to deal with the healthcare industry, private health insurance being abolished. That's not a winner.
You're right, but you take a look at the media, it's going to be tough for the president to overcome. How do you think he handles reelect?
Well, again, as I mentioned, he's got a very strong economy to run on. He's got a dedicated base. If he can pull off a couple of victories with respect to trade with China, I think that would go a long way to solidifying his reputation as taking a hard line and extracting concessions on behalf of ordinary Americans. I think that you may notice that there are some Democrats who loudly support him in his efforts of dealing with getting a fairer deal with China, including Chuck Schumer from New York, the minority leader in the Senate. He has always supported the president on this particular issue because he knows that the U.S. is getting the bad end of the stick. So if the president can pull off a couple of these victories to go along with a continued positive economy, it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to beat him.
Yet we have the usual suspects making a run. Recently we had the debates. Kamala Harris, the belle of the ball right now, going after Joe Biden. And Phil, you and I are about the same age. Hard to believe it's all over busing, which, let's face it, I don't think has been relevant in this country for over 20 years.
Yeah, I struggle to even remember busing from my own youth and the issues that went around that. I think that's already starting to backfire a bit on her to a certain extent. I think that, frankly, Joe Biden, if he can manage to stave off 20-something people attacking him, that he's probably the best candidate to take on the president. I think that people confuse the liberal wing of Twitter for the average Democrat voter, especially in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I think that there's quite a number of what we might have once called conservative Democrats or Reagan Democrats, that they are in danger of scaring away and letting them think that Trump is probably the best choice for a second term. And let's not forget, Kevin, the vast majority of presidents are elected to a second term. So it's not difficult to imagine Trump winning re-election.
What about the Republicans? Can he take back the House and the Senate, if you will? Let's face it, we want to keep the Senate. But what about the House? That seems to be crucial.
Yes, and I'm hearing rumblings that there are not so many people who think that we have a good chance of taking the House back. But I did notice recently, a few days ago, a record haul of money raised by the fundraising arm of the Republicans in Congress. Just an absolute stonker of a number that really would give us the opportunity or the means, shall I say, to put the good fight to these new Democrats, especially the ones in Republican districts, and particularly the ones who have come out in favor of impeachment for the president. I mean, we're talking about some seats in Orange County that have never voted Democrat before, other than in this particular race, who are just getting out a bit over their skis as far as being a little bit too liberal for folks who generally are Republican.
Right.
So I think that to the extent that we can take it back, obviously that would be fabulous. But anything that eats into their majority gives us more power. So I think that it would be great. We have the money to do it, but it's not going to be easy.
It's never easy. Our great friend Phil Hardy joining us. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. That's 107.5 FM and 580 AM. And blessed to be with you once again. Phil Hardy joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. So you work in Washington. You live in Idaho. What impact does that have on you personally, on your family? I mean, we love talking politics, but it's got to be a great sacrifice for you.
It is, and I'm happy that both of my children will finally be going to college this year. They'll both be at the University of Idaho. And that will obviously free up a lot of the responsibility I have to constantly go back and forth. But even when that is out of the way, as it will be in August, I'm still going to consider Idaho a home. So some of that commuting is kind of brutal, but I'll be doing less of it, that's for sure.
Yeah, I have to hit you with this. Your air travel in the past few years, have you figured out just how the airlines do everything based on whether you're going to Idaho or back to D.C. or to Montana or to Denver? I mean, have you memorized the hubs and the deals and the spokes and all those things?
Oh, my God, yes. Sadly, yes. I have accumulated quite a significant amount of knowledge that no one should really need to have. Yeah, it's very difficult. You almost make friends with the people on the telephone line at Delta Airlines, who I really adore. I love Delta. We don't get many choices to fly back and forth, but I've flown them all, and Delta's the best. But yeah, I mean, I even memorize flight numbers. It's really terrible.
Well, it is a cost, if you will. So let's.
It's a real cost. It's a financial cost too.
Yes, I imagine that. So, getting back to the business at hand, the president making the roll last week, going and meeting with Kim Jong-un. The press was flipping out about it. What was the reaction in D.C.?
I think the reaction in D.C. was kind of, well, he actually just did something that no sitting president has ever done before. He's actually set foot in North Korea. The more that they actually talking is good. Talking is good when you're dealing with people who have nuclear weapons. The more we talk, the better it has to be. They have to develop some kind of relationship. And you know that no matter who is president in the future, they continue these policies. Only Nixon could go to China. But after that, relations with China were continued by future presidents. And we don't even remember a time, well, I was like a kid, obviously, but, that it was impossible to think of anyone going to China. So it was just as impossible to think that a president would go to North Korea, and he's done it. So in that respect, there were people who actually gave him some credit.
Right. Nixon goes to China. We still talk about that all the time. Back to the president. The folks that work with him, his sons. How do you think they're handling all this intense pressure? Because you're an insider. You understand what's going on. You've been to the White House. You've done business there. Very different world than what we get through the media lenses here in Idaho.
Well, obviously, Don Jr. loves it. I mean, he loves the campaigning. He loves the fight. He loves the Twitter. And he is a beloved figure amongst the Republican grassroots across the country. He is really a superstar to them, and he quite obviously could have a political career of his own and probably will at some point. But, he's not really involved with policy. That's really the domain of his daughter and his son-in-law, who have increasingly gained more and more control of the apparatus, which is different. And I think that, Don Jr. is going to be out there on the campaign trail for his dad like nobody's business. You'll be seeing him in Idaho. Of this, there's no doubt. So I think that the president thrives, on this sort of this thing. This has been his whole life. I think that was the quote that came out of the Time magazine article previously about him was, his whole life has been a risk. It's taking risks. So he enjoys this. And I think people are used to it now. I think that people who are just barking dogs at the caravan have got to just move on and attack him on policy, his own policy, rather than the previous administration's policies, which we see at the border, and trying to resolve some of these things and put forward some ideas. So the president's doing just fine.
Back to where we go from here with the 2012 folks. You got Joe Biden. I agree with you. See, I think that you're going to have some squishy Republicans, maybe from the Paul Ryan wing, the Mitt Romney wing, saying we can work with Joe. We're going to reclaim our party. We're going to get Trump out, and then we'll go after Biden or whoever his VP is. Besides Joe Biden, do you see anybody else appealing to not Trump Republicans, but establishment Republicans?
God, no, not at all. I think that you will find that there will be some Republicans, even like the Lindsey Grahams, who aren't going to want to go after Joe Biden if he's the nominee, but rather go after the party itself. And they will not be effective messengers anyway, and probably not of use to the re-elect because they have such long histories with Joe Biden. But it's by no means a sure thing that Joe Biden is going to survive even another month on the campaign trail without saying, I don't need this. However, the prize is so sweet that I do suspect he will stay into the end. But I'm not so sure he's going to be the nominee anymore. The party has really passed him up in many ways. So he's going to have a real brutal time.
Right. But if not Biden, then who could emerge?
Well, I mean, obviously, if it's not Bernie Sanders at this moment, and obviously the crystal ball is always cloudy, it looks like, on the ascendancy is Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris.
Both very different candidates when it comes to one is, one would say Bernie Light, and the other, you could say, out of California, a Westerner that has her own unique style that is getting praise, but you wonder just how much substance, and we've covered this before, she really has.
Well, we haven't got anywhere near where we're going to go with Kamala Harris, but she's going to have quite a few detractors amongst the far left progressive caucus. When she was the Attorney General of California, she was really a very law and order, shall we say, Attorney General. And law and order are words that do not go well with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I think she'll be in a lot of trouble at some point over her positions on incarceration and things of that nature. So it's a long way to go. It's a very long way to go.
Phil Hardy, anything else? You got about 15 seconds.
Kevin, it's always a pleasure to be able to come on the radio with you and talk about things here in D.C. and also about things back in Idaho. So I just appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
We appreciate Phil Hardy joining us. Of course, you can catch this interview and more at KIDOTalkRadio.com, the KIDO Talk Radio app. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.